Tonight we ask, should the U.S. pay reparations to black Americans? I'm Carlos Watson, and this is Point Taken.
Funding for Point Taken was provided in part by the Pew Charitable Trusts, by the WGBH Fund for Innovation, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Carlos Watson. Now, history can't be rewritten, but can it be redressed? That's the heart of the conversation about reparations. Should the U.S. pay reparations to black Americans? Now, we've got 26 minutes to cover 400 years of injustice. Plenty of time, of course. But seriously, the debate won't be complete without you good folks at home. So throughout the show, tell us what you think. Find us on our Facebook page and live tweet us, right about now, at #PointTakenPBS. Make your point on national television. All right, now let's meet our debaters. Team Yes, we've got Wendy Murphy, attorney and professor from New England Law, Boston. And you're joined by Dr. Valerie Wilson, economist at the Economic Policy Institute. Welcome to both of you. So one of you is going to start off and tell me your top 3 points in 30 seconds or less.
Valerie. Absolutely, that will be me. Point number one, systems of oppression that began with slavery only really ended when African Americans, if they've ended when African Americans got full civil rights in the 1960s. So that's only 50 years ago. It's not that far removed. The second point is that there have been people who have measured the economic value that slave labor, discrimination contributed to the American economy. It ranges from the billions to trillions, but nobody says it's zero. The third point is that we have precedent for reparations. We've done this sort of thing before for different communities. So we can arrange a way that it would be practical to do that for African Americans.
Okay, all right. Strong start by Team Yes. Now, the other team says no, reparations are not the answer. We have Camille Foster, media entrepreneur and co-host of the Fifth Column podcast. And today he's joined by Tom Shattuck, columnist and radio show host of the Boston Herald. All right, welcome, Team No. Would love to hear from you guys. Which one of you is going to give me your top 3 points in 30 seconds?
I think that'll be me.
Okay, Camille.
Yeah, so I certainly understand. I think we're all here because of a pursuit of justice. But I think the important things to consider are who pays, how much do they pay, and who do they pay it to? These are impossibly difficult questions to actually reconcile and answer in a meaningful and just way.
Less than 30 seconds, Camille. You set the record. The first person ever to do that on Point Taken. I love that. All right. Now, look, we've asked our studio audience before the show, should the U.S. pay reparations to black Americans? 58% said yes. 42% said no. Now, you good folks at home, you're also invited to chime in as well online at pbs.org/pointtaken. All right, so let's start with Team Yes. So, Wendy, you heard a little bit of the back and forth to start with. Where are you on the question of reparations? Is it just? Is it right? Even before we get to the question of is it feasible?
Well, so as an attorney, I am always open to the idea that you should compensate someone for their suffering. It's what we do. It's what justice is. And justice is a core concept around which societies are organized. So doing justice, I think it's a no-brainer. Really, the question is, how do we do it? And are there models we can use? And is it appropriate? I mean, some people say it's not fair to financially burden this generation for what happened a long time ago. But we're not burdening anybody. We're burdening the government. Why? Because it was the government's policies that caused slavery, that caused Jim Crow, and that perpetuated racism and discrimination, not only for many, many years, but it continues to this day, despite the Civil Rights Act. So if you can't give somebody full equality and fix the problems of their past, especially on something as important as slavery, the least you can do is give them some reparations.
Tom Shattuck, are you in on that? Where are you?
No, I don't understand. You say it's not hurting people, Wendy, but ripping my daughter's Elmo piggy bank from her and taking her money where she is not culpable for any of this stuff. Indeed, there is an existential aggression towards Americans now. I mean, the government has no money. The people have the money. So yes, we're ripping money away from Americans who have many of whom had no part in any of this and had no relatives who had any part in any of this.
Now, Camille, jump in here because various people, including the author Ta-Nehisi Coates, wrote a famous piece a couple years ago, and he said it's not just about slavery. It's not even just about Jim Crow. It's about what's going on today, even during the most recent financial crisis with subprime mortgages, et cetera. He said that blacks and others systematically discriminated against. It's provable, and consequently, there should be justice paid. Credible to you? Not credible to you?
The word that comes to mind is conflation. We're talking about several hundred years here. We're talking about injured parties who are long dead. We're talking about parties that actually meted out these injuries who are also long dead. I do not think that it serves the people who we actually want to empower to try and conflate all of these things. We end up missing the point. It is not correct to say, in my estimation, that we can exactly measure the impact of any particular policy on a broad swath of humanity. We need to be a bit more precise. If we're having backward-looking conversations, that is time that we could be using and investing in having forward-looking conversations about things that we can affirmatively address. We cannot actually mitigate several hundred years of past injustice by taking things from people today who, again, were not a party to the crime. That strikes me as unjust.
So Valerie, where are you on this? You're an economist, and I hear Camille saying several things. One is just the practicality of actually figuring this all out. He's saying even for you smart economists, it's too difficult. And second, that there's also a question in his mind of justice about that kind of transfer of wealth. How do you speak to that?
I mean, I don't think anybody is saying it's an easy problem to solve. But the fact is, wealth doesn't evaporate. It passes from generation to generation to generation, continues to grow, continues to multiply. And the current wealth gap that we see today is largely a result of that inherited wealth. The other thing I think is important when we think about reparations, again, that money will not evaporate. People aren't going to eat it. That money is going to be spent, is going to be invested. People are going to use it to start businesses, create jobs. You know, there's a multiplying effect to spending money and investing money in communities. It doesn't just absorb and go away.
I don't want to monopolize the conversation at all, but I'd like to jump in here. I'm not certain that that's an accurate representation of how wealth is created or how it's transferred through the generations. The fact of the matter is, wealth is about prosperity and about doing well. You invest it, you create more wealth. We all live in a very wealthy society, and part of our wealth are the institutions like justice, for example, and the administration of justice. And in order to have a just system, it has to be a law, equality before the law. And it is unequal, it seems to me, to burden, for example, immigrants who've come to this country, often fleeing injustices of their own, with paying for, again, the sins of past generations. 9% of the population actually owned slaves towards the time when the Civil War was about to happen. It seems incredibly unjust to posture as if all of the wealth that exists today is attributable to those injustices. All civilizations throughout history have had slavery.
It isn't about the individuals who pay. You keep turning it into an individuals must pay. This is a class-based injury that is still ongoing. And it's important in a democracy where justice matters to repair people in some fashion when they suffer. This is a class-based suffering.
Who are the people?
It doesn't matter who the individuals are, whether you can prove these little things.
Who are the people?
The people who are suffering today because of the sins of the past. And it's like an ongoing tort. It's like a continuous conspiracy in a way where the clock doesn't start running on when you file the lawsuit until the discrimination ends. And we ain't there yet.
Yeah, and I'd say that that's the conflation there. And I think that is the danger. If we're going to talk about a problem, a concrete particular problem, like the streets of Chicago, where there is a very serious epidemic of homicide happening on those streets, it is predominantly impacting young African Americans, particularly males. I haven't actually told you anything about the problem that's helpful. And by you talking about discrimination, I don't know that you've told me anything affirmative that we can actually do about the problem. We actually need to start addressing problems like the drug war, for example, which is related to almost 50% of those homicides directly and explicitly.
In the context of reparations.
I don't understand how that's helpful. That actually seems like a distraction and balkanizes the issue.
Hang on one second.
It's not an either-or proposition.
Oftentimes it is.
It is not an either-or proposition. Now, if people want to frame it that way, I would say that that's incorrect. Those are issues that definitely need to be addressed within the context within which they exist. But the other issue that we're talking about here is reparations, which is atoning for paying restitution for people being economically enriched unjustly. That's a fact. That's happened. It's been measured. You know, we can put a dollar value on it. How we do that, I think, is what's more.
We don't have a precise dollar
What's
amount,
more debatable? It's not zero. We know it's non-zero. We know it's at least in the billions up into the trillions.
The super highway to destitution is single-parent homes, and this has grown exponentially since the last 30 years, since the Great Society. So these solves that we're using are certainly not effective. If anything, I don't know how you how you would draw back from the fact that you've got 72% of African American women having kids out of wedlock. Where is that linearly brought back to slavery?
But that's not the issue, and it's really not about can we make a perfect solution. All we have is money. That's what our legal system offers. We don't have anything else to give. It's what justice provides when you do reparations.
Perhaps the
Maybe
solutions aren't legal.
Perfect, but nothing is bad, and an imperfect solution is better. We did it for the Japanese with internment. We did it for Native Americans when we stole their land. When you steal someone's stuff, you got to pay them back. This is the stealing of humanity, the stealing of bodies.
You know, when we
hang on, guys. I'm gonna. Is this good yet or what? This is hot. It's good. It's quick. We're gonna take a moment here in the conversation to do a wonderful segment that we call Fact Check. Kind of appropriate to do that right now, where I pose a fact or a question, and then each of the teams is going to get to work together to give me an answer. So you guys ready for that? Kind of a little television timeout in the middle of all this. Is that everybody good with that? All right, here we go. First question. Which of the following companies profited from slavery in the 1800s? Aetna, Wachovia, J.P. Morgan Chase. I'm going to give you guys a few seconds to consult amongst yourselves. Aetna, Wachovia, J.P. Morgan Chase. All right, beep, beep. Here we go. All right, the question again, which of the following companies profited from slavery in the 1800s? Camille, Tom?
I believe it's Aetna.
Aetna?
Yeah, providing loans and other things for slaves.
Insuring slaves? Okay, over
Aetna,
here.
insuring slaves.
Aetna. Interestingly enough, you're both right, but incomplete. Actually, all of the above were involved and issued apologies.
You asked in a tricky way.
I did.
I was waiting for that to be an option.
Trickeration is part of our trade on Point Taken.
I own stock in none of them.
All right, so a half point to each side. All right, next question. In today's America, what's the difference in median net worth between white and black households? Is it 2x, 5x, more than 10 times? I'm going to give you guys a few seconds to consult amongst yourselves.
I think that's about right, but I don't remember.
These guys are the quick ones today. They come back quickly and ready to go all the time. I love it. All right, I'm going to go over to Team Yes first. Wendy, Valerie, what's the answer? The difference in median net worth between white and black households?
It's more than 10 times.
Wow. What say you?
I think we're at 5.
You're at 5. Okay, the answer is that in today's America, Dr. Valerie Wilson, the economist, has it right. It's unfortunately more than 10 times, closer to 12 times. All right, last question. Which president signed a law that granted reparations to Japanese Americans who were interned by the government during World War II? Was it President Ronald Reagan? Was it President Harry S. Truman? Was it President James Earl Carter, popularly known as Jimmy Carter? Okay, you guys ready? Everybody's quick today. All right, back to the ladies first.
It was Reagan.
Reagan, okay?
Was indeed.
Yep.
Was indeed Reagan. In fact, you're both right. It was President Ronald Reagan who in 1988 signed the Civil Liberties Act and granted those reparations. So very interesting. In doing so, authorized almost $2 billion in reparations under that. All right, let's continue with a look at how Americans more broadly feel about reparations. Now, those of you who watch Point Taken every week know that we get a fantastic Point Taken survey, an exclusive one from Marist every week. This week they asked, should the U.S. pay reparations? Here's what they found. 24% of Americans said yes. 72%, almost 3x, said no. Now, here are those answers, though, broken down by race, even more interesting, maybe not surprising to those of you here. 11% of white respondents said yes for reparations. Much higher percent of black respondents, 63%, said yes. All right, now Maris also asked, is the current wealth of the U.S. significantly tied to historic slave labor? And here's what they found. 31% of Americans said yes. 59% said no. Now, again, when you break it down by race, also differential. 21% of white respondents said yes. Current U.S. wealth is tied to that, whereas 66% of black respondents said yes. So, again, a big difference there, almost 3x among black respondents. So, Camille, someone looking at that data could say, the issue, say that one of the core issues in the debate on this is whether or not you see the free labor in the 1700s and 1800s and even some of the other wealth transfers in the 1900s through Jim Crow as having meaningfully enriched the country. And that if you don't see that as having happened, then you see this as a unfortunate but smaller issue and therefore not worthy of reparations. But if you do see the success of cotton and the success of the Industrial Revolution as having made America the world's strongest economy, then it leads you to say that we should do something. Do you agree that look at history and how important slave labor is has a lot to do with how people feel about the reparations question?
I'd say that that's about right. I mean, I think part of the issue is beginning with the abstraction, that it's the wealth of the nation. The reality is that households have wealth, and I know everyone here works and has a job and goes out and earns an income. You weren't born and simply given a great deal because you were a citizen of this country. That's not the way wealth actually works. And I think it really is deleterious to talk about both wealth and a lot of these problems that we're interested in solving in this aggregate way because we overgeneralize and we don't get to specifics. Good intentions are not sufficient to make for good policy.
So when you look at someone like Germany, who after World War II and after the Holocaust spent $60 billion on reparations and took responsibility as a government, as a country for that, you look at that and you say, what?
Well, and I think this is actually an important point as well. The German government's reparations program and the reparations program here in the United States, those were funds when they were paid to individuals that were actually paid to individuals who were directly hurt or people who were actually members of that person's estate. They were not handed out generations later. I think it's all well and good to use euphemisms like this. It is not us who pay, it's the government. The government has no money but that which it takes from individuals.
Well,
and those individuals are citizens of diverse backgrounds
when the government
who didn't own slaves.
Discriminates and engages in abhorrent behavior that is unconstitutional,
Sure.
When the government does that and it has to pay, unless it's got insurance, it's got to pay. And a democracy means the money has to come from people. That's not an objection. That's what happens every time I sue the government.
The injured parties would have to be paid. And again, most of the time it's paid by the aggressor. And I don't know that in every single case you can say that the government was the aggressor. Let's talk about the actual consequences of slavery.
When you say that, though, there are people who would look up and they would say that the government was the aggressor to the extent that it was U.S. laws that permitted slavery and permitted Jim Crow and, in some cases, permitted redlining. So for those who look at that government action and say that was the government acting on behalf of the people, does that lead you, if that is proved out, to say there should be reparations? Or even if it was, do you still say reparations would not be the right solution here?
I think it's difficult to impose a contemporary moral standard on people who lived hundreds or thousands of years ago. Slavery is an institution that is older than writing, that is older than currency.
I didn't
say that made it right at all. I think it's hyperbole to suggest that I said it was right.
No, the fact that it's old and that the results are still occurring in many ways that are just impossibly difficult to fix, and this, in a way, would at least move us forward. I mean, we're still so stuck.
How would this move us forward?
Because it matters when you apologize, and it matters when you give somebody something for something you took away. That's what justice is. It matters.
Everyone owes everyone an apology.
And we keep using the excuse that it happened so long ago as a reason not to do it. Well, shame on the U.S. government for not taking care of this before now. I think that only means that we've got a little bit more complicated problem to solve. We've got to come up with a more nuanced solution to it. I don't think that nullifies the fact that the debt is owed.
This isn't an attempt to nullify anything. This is actually an attempt to stand up for a just cause. The justice here, the injustice, is taking things from people who did not do anything and giving it to people who were not, in fact, directly injured. I agree with you that history has consequences, but as I said, everyone in this room's ancestors, for the most part, were held in some form of subjugation, be it serfdom or slavery.
There were also abolitionists, in the North, certainly, and I believe we went to war over this at some point and had an incredibly bloody civil war.
Kind of a big deal.
Yes, which is kind of a big deal. So there were attempts to right the situation at the time, and there have been historically since then as well. Obviously, it has been a tough uphill battle.
All right, Wendy, if you hear, though, more people, as Camille, as Tom have shared, say to you, I am worried that it's very tough to be clear about not who should pay. Let's say they were to concede that the government should pay, but then who should benefit. How would you deal with that? How would you deal with who should benefit? If they were to concede, I'm not saying that you are, but if they were to concede and say that the government should pay, but we don't know to whom the government should pay, how would you think about addressing that?
Well, I think an awful lot of smart people in this country could be in a room together for a while and figure it out. But my sense is that writing a check is silly. I mean, you give people money, they spend it, and we still have the same systemic problem. So I wouldn't do that. I'm not even sure that's one of the ideas that really is being proposed seriously. But you could structure institutionally something that is both symbolic of the historical problem. You want to be able to remember that it happened and do it in the name of, we really don't like that that happened. This is our apology. This is our move forward. But, you know, something that institutionally acknowledges what happened and provides a space for economic growth that will close that income gap, because that's the biggest part of the problem. I don't know what that looks like, but I can imagine very smart people coming up with something.
And Carlos, this is actually part of the discussion that's going on now among people who have already gotten to the point that we need to do it, and talking about how we do it is, you know, how you decide that. Some suggest that it should be people who are descendants of slaves, and that there would have to be some effort to document and prove that you are the descendant of someone who was enslaved in America. You know, there have been any other number of recommendations to make community-type investments, or a trust fund that people could pull for them to pay for college or start a business or buy a home, etc. But, you know, that's part of the discussion, I think, that gets beyond should we do it. That's more of the how do we do it.
I can see it being plausible to find out who to give the money to, but who do you take it from?
I'm not even sure that's plausible. I mean, Sasha and Malia Obama are good examples. They're very privileged young ladies. You would presume that they are African Americans, and hence they have ancestors who were enslaved. It is quite possible that they have ancestors who were also involved in the slave trade. Not simply her white ancestors on account of her father, but perhaps also her African father's ancestors, West Africans, his father was East African, were heavily involved in the slave trade. 90% of the slaves were brought from the inner parts of Africa, and they weren't brought to the coast by Europeans. This seems like an important point. Why are we exclusively focusing on...
These are all red herrings.
No,
I think smart people...
It's not a red herring.
Let's going back to the
let's
we
talk
can't
about
figure
smart
out the
people.
individual answers, and we're talking about the class-based systemic problem that continues to this day. I think smart people will be very capable of saying, let's not send a check to Malia and Sasha.
But they weren't so smart with the war on... They weren't so smart with the war on poverty, which has gone on in this country for a very long time, and we're also not acknowledging the very real consequences of unintended consequences. They happen. It is quite possible that what you actually need isn't nearly capital resources to be poured into communities. We've seen that happen with the war on poverty. We've seen wealth transfers. That doesn't transform cultures. In fact, it could retard the development of a community.
And I want you to be at the table and come up with some great ideas that won't do that.
Magic.
Hey, you know what? That's perfect for point taken. I like that. All right. A great conversation, obviously, and don't we all wish this could go on for another hour? Is this worthy of more? Bravo to you guys. Terrific, engaged conversation. All right, at Point Taken, we believe that you can always learn something new, even from people you disagree with. So Team Yes, briefly, what's the best point that you heard Camille and Tom arguing that reparations should not be paid? And by the way, bonus points if you're sincere. All right, Valerie and Wendy, what was the best point? I understand you disagree with the gentleman here, but what's the best point that they made?
I would say probably the point that it's probably the most difficult to argue is the specifics of how you work this out. I don't think anybody has sort of completely resolved that. I don't think that means that you don't do it. I just think that means we've got more work to actually get to a solution.
All right, so Camille and Tom, best point that you heard Wendy and Valerie lay out. Again, understanding that you fundamentally disagree, but what's the best, most compelling point you heard them make?
I thought it was interesting when Valerie mentions the timeline of prosperity and the fact that it is connected, very often a connected thing. And certainly you look back and you know that blacks weren't in on the homesteading and all of these other wonderful things that were literally wealth was distributed. I think what Valerie said makes you take a closer look at that.
All right, I really want to thank my guests today. Man, the time went by, which is a tribute to them. Attorney and Professor Wendy Murphy, Dr. Valerie Wilson from the Economic Policy Institute. Thank you both for coming. Camille Foster from the Fifth Column podcast. If you haven't listened to it, you definitely should. And Tom Shattuck, I know everybody reads and enjoys his work for the Boston Herald. All right, that's it for us. Over at PBS NewsHour tomorrow night, how about a train that goes from San Francisco to L.A. in half an hour? Check out the NewsHour science series, Leading Edge. And point taken, we'll be back next week. Our debate, though, is going to be, is the U.S. doing more harm or good in the Middle East? So we're going to take this conversation global. We're going to keep going online and on social. I'm Carlos Watson. This was Point Taken. Good night and good luck.